This is Sigmund Bloom coming to you with the Thursday, August 8th Audible. Cecil Lammy is on assignment. Today we're going to talk about situations that you need to avoid, starting with Justin Herbert, who has plantar fasciitis in his foot. Why is this such a disappointment? Well, Justin Herbert was already falling outside of the top 15 quarterbacks, even though more recently in the last year or two, he was a top 5 pick at quarterback, because everyone expects this offense to be very run heavy. Now, there's a possibility that game scripts may not allow them to do that. And Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are pretty good offensive coordinator, offensive minds. However, this team also lacks top receiving options. Ladd McConkey has been on and off the field with something, and that was part of the reason there was some skepticism about him as a first-round pick, was because of his durability. So now with Justin Herbert now looking at fewer pass attempts, well, perhaps he would be used more as a runner. He's big and rugged and athletic enough to be an asset as a runner. And there were some indications that Harbaugh and Roman may be more likely to use him as a runner than he was used by previous regimes with the Chargers. Now that he's got this plantar fasciitis issue, that is going to be a problem, because plantar fasciitis is not an injury that resolves or heals over the course of a season. It's a pain management injury. Sometimes in the past, when we've heard about players having a plantar fascia tear, you almost want to root for it to become a full tear, which relieves at least some pain, but does not resolve the injury. So you have a chance that Herbert is at the least going to be playing uncomfortably through pain throughout the season, or at least on and off. And what will create a higher risk of aggravating that injury? Running. So I think that this really puts a damper on any of the upside scenarios for the Chargers offense. And especially, it puts a damper on the upside scenario for Herbert as a fantasy quarterback, because that extra boost from running may not be there, at least not this year. Turning the page to another situation that we need to pay attention to, it is DeAndre Hopkins and his knee injury in Tennessee. Now, Hopkins last year was basically the only real viable receiver in this offense. Turn the page to this year, and you see the addition of Calvin Ridley. You see the addition of Tyler Boyd. And there was a question whether DeAndre Hopkins, who is on the back nine of his career, would even be able to support that ADP. He was close to Calvin Ridley, which some may wonder is reasonable with Calvin Ridley, the number one. Calvin Ridley, you hear the Brian Callahan saying he's going to be in the Jamar Chase role in this offense. So we were already a little skeptical about DeAndre Hopkins' ADP in around the 7th, 8th round. Now he has a knee injury, which is not going to be surgically repaired. Just with 4 weeks of rest, he may or may not be ready for week one. You have enter a stage left Traylon Burks, who was a first round pick 3 years ago. New regime, a chance to redeem himself, and he is having a great camp, getting a lot of praise from onlookers, including Des Bryant. So now you have a player in Traylon Burks who is using this opportunity of DeAndre Hopkins being sidelined for camp to show what he can do to endear himself to this new regime. And you also have a lot of other options, such as Tyler Boyd, even the receivers out of the backfield, Tyjae Spears, Tony Pollard, as reasonable outlets, where DeAndre Hopkins is not going to be the kind of receiver at this point in his career who can separate deep downfield or otherwise create big plays. He's more of a possession receiver. We have a lot of those options. Also, these kinds of knee injuries that are ligament strains, but are not surgically healed, repaired during the preseason, can be aggravated. They can get worse as the season goes on. Basically, players are as healthy as they are going to be for the entire season at the beginning of the season. So, much like Justin Herbert, if DeAndre Hopkins is going into the season with an injury that is not surgically repaired, then we can probably expect no upside scenarios. He should be falling well into the double digit rounds. And there's just, again, not a lot of upside there. Perhaps you might be looking at Calvin Ridley as a more attractive pick in the 7th, 6th round. You may be looking at Traylon Burks as a more attractive late round pick. This does put a little ding in Will Levis's upside profile, but not enough to change that he is still a quarterback, especially in 2 Superflex leagues, quarterback 2 leagues, that you would look at as a late round upside quarterback 3. So that situation is one that is not looking good for the veteran. Another situation that is not looking good for the veteran is in Dallas. There was a lot of hope that Ezekiel Elliott could be a sneaky second half of your draft pick because, well, he can pass block and maybe he can do some short yardage running and he can be a receiver out of the backfield. And whenever Ramondre Stevenson was hurt last year, that was good enough for Ezekiel Elliott to have some value off of the waiver wire. Competing only with Royce Freeman, who's already banged up, and Rico Dowdle, there was thought that Ezekiel Elliott would be able to distinguish himself as at least getting the most valuable touches in this backfield from a fantasy perspective. That might be true, but we are hearing from multiple sources that Rico Dowdle is the most impressive back. That's not a tough contest to win in Dallas, but he is the most impressive back right now. Ezekiel Elliott, well, we've just seen some clips of him looking old. So this is not any kind of expectation creating now of Zeke having fantasy value. He should make the team. He may even lead the backfield in touches. But remember, this is also a situation where the Dallas Cowboys are likely to add one, if not two backs when they see who gets released or see who may be available via trade when teams take a look at their backfields and see where they have a surplus of talent. The answer here isn't necessarily to pivot to Rico Dowdle, just because this backfield is still one that is murky. And I suppose if there's any fantasy takeaway here, the Cowboys need to sign CeeDee Lamb and fast. And this offense will obviously run through Dak Prescott. If you were thinking maybe the running game will have a renaissance, well, no. And remember, this team does have some questions on the offensive line also. So it does not look like Ezekiel Elliott should be on your sleeper list in the second half of your draft. Now, let's talk about a young player whose situation is changing just because of information from the coach. We hear from head coach Dave Canales, new head coach of the Carolina Panthers, that Jonathan Brooks, second round pick, one maybe that the Cowboys were going to look at in the second round. In fact, Jerry Jones told everybody they were going to look at him in the second round. There's a connection between these two stories for you. Jonathan Brooks will not play in the preseason, and now we have a specific estimate of when he'll return, week 3 or week 4. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. One, we have specifics now, and we do know how much to discount players whenever we know they're going to miss games at the beginning of the season. Now, Adam Harstad has told us that it's actually the weeks late in the season and the playoffs that are the most important. So weeks missed early in the season aren't necessarily a death knell to a player's value. But when you look at the big picture here, what this tells you, because Jonathan Brooks had his ACL tear during the college football season last year, he had his ACL surgery last year. It was not, at least based on reports, an ACL plus injury that would have an extended timeline. There was no reports of setbacks or any worries about his recovery. So if the Panthers are saying he's not going to see the field until week 3 or week 4, what that tells you is they're being hyper conservative, which makes sense. This team is not contending for the playoffs this year. This team is looking at Jonathan Brooks as a long-term piece to help Bryce Young's development, to help the development of this franchise. So why would you take any risk of his long-term health to get him out there a few games earlier? But what this also means is when Jonathan Brooks returns, you would expect, much like Breece Hall last year, a 3 to 4 week ramp up period where he will be sharing with Chuba Hubbard. And it's the first time I mentioned Chuba Hubbard's name in this section of the show, but perhaps I should have mentioned it earlier because that's the real takeaway here. Other than Jonathan Brooks now does not belong in that 7th, 8th round tier with running backs like James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Ramondre Stevenson, running backs that we know are going to lead their backfield in touches. Well, in Mostert's case, maybe not in touches, but probably in rushing touchdowns, and certainly still the leader of the backfield, according to head coach Mike McDaniel. So we're going to drop Jonathan Brooks out of that 7th, 8th round group and into more of the speculative 9th, 10th, 11th round group, and know that if there is an impact, and there could be an impact, it could happen in the second half of the year. This could be a player, maybe if redraft teams are struggling, you may look to trade for Jonathan Brooks around week 4, week 5 when he first gets on the field, and maybe only gets 8 or 10 touches if the team is struggling and 1-3 or 0-4. But really, the flip side of this is what becomes interesting, especially for best ball, because we're looking now at Chuba Hubbard as the starter. And remember, this team may give Miles Sanders a chance for redemption. Maybe that's a running back the Cowboys could trade for, tying these stories together. But Chuba Hubbard was good down the stretch last season, and the new regime, has had nothing but good things to say about him. So Chuba Hubbard is a running back, even if he starts to move up out of the late rounds in the second half of your draft, that you can start as a running back 2 or a flex. He's going to be the cheapest starting running back in fantasy drafts. And if Brooks has any sort of setback, or if the team is hyper conservative with Brooks, or if Hubbard just starts out hot, then we may see that value a la Zach Moss with Jonathan Taylor last year. We may see that value persist for Chuba Hubbard. So we're off of Jonathan Brooks. We're on Chuba Hubbard. And in best ball leagues, especially if you like to stock your bench in best ball leagues with rookie running backs, speculative rookie running backs who could hit and be league winners, or also not contribute anything to your best ball team all season, Chuba Hubbard helps because you know he's going to give you some weeks early in the season while those rookies ramp up and earn trust from their coaches. So a changing situation as we get information from the coaches in Carolina. We don't need any information to see how the situation, well, quite frankly, is not changing, which is bad, in Las Vegas with the quarterbacks. Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, come on down. Well, no one's emerging here. This is what happens whenever 6 quarterbacks go in the top 12 picks of the draft, and you're left with Brock Bowers. But maybe this is also a reason to not expect a ceiling year from Brock Bowers in his rookie year, or from Devontae Adams, unless Devontae Adams somehow gets traded to San Francisco with Brandon Ayuk going to Las Vegas. Not a 0% chance, not a great chance, but crazier things have happened. That's your hope of Devontae Adams returning second round or maybe even third round value at this point, because everything that we're hearing out of Las Vegas is that the quarterback play is not good. So even Jacoby Myers, who has been impressing while Devontae Adams is waiting around to see what's going to happen. This is a pass offense. Brock Bowers is going to take a big role in this one. Michael Mayer, second-year tight end, second-round pick last year. You're going to have a lot of 2 tight end sets. This is not going to be an overachieving pass offense. If there is a silver lining, if there is something here that you might want to take advantage of, it is that we are hearing from onlookers that the defense is looking good, and it should look good with the investments they've made, especially up front. That could be better for Zamir White. You have a non-existent passing game. You have a good defense. You have a team that's going to try to turn games into street fights, keep the games low scoring under new, now not interim head coach Antonio Pierce, which means as much work as Zamir White can handle. So include Zamir White in that excellent 7th, 8th running back tier, 7th, 8th round tier with lots of options. I've already mentioned some. Mostert, Montgomery, Connor, Stevenson. Add White to that list. Aaron Jones. You can confidently go into your draft this year and know that you're going to get a running back or 2 in the 7th, 8th round that you can feel comfortable starting. Those are typically dead zone running backs that we see in the 4th, 5th round. That discount should allow you to be comfortable waiting on your running back 2, maybe on your running back 1. That more coming later this week in my draft day game plan. Last item, changing situation. This one's a bummer. Josh Downs, who is having a great camp and maybe has the best chemistry with Anthony Richardson of any of the Colts receivers, goes down with a high ankle sprain. Now, the good news with this one is high ankle sprains with enough rest, about a month, which is about how long we have until the season comes, do tend to resolve and may not come up again. So perhaps the fantasy prescription here is if Josh Downs starts to fall even further in the late rounds of drafts, maybe out of the 10th, 11th, 12th round range into the 13th, 14th, 15th round range, you may want to go ahead and target him. He's going to be a deep target, a big play target for Anthony Richardson. You know that Shane Steichen is going to let Anthony Richardson take shots downfield. He also has Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell on the outside, but in the middle of the field, that is speed slot Josh Downs. And Josh Downs, I believe on a per snap basis, was about as productive as Michael Pittman with Anthony Richardson last year. So this could be a buy the dip opportunity for Downs, assuming that his recovery from a high ankle sprain goes well. Hope that your August is going well. We've got you covered in so many different ways at Football Guys. For those of you on your way to the FF Expo, look for Joe Bryant and all the other Football Guys family. Give them a hug and a kiss for me. Here's a hug and a kiss for you, folks, because you are the best and you are so classy.